Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's Customer Experience Excellence Centre webinar. Leading today's webinar is David Conway, a Director at KPMG Nunwood and author of our recently published 2016 US Analysis, Harnessing the Power of the Many, which is something we'll be discussing today. Also joining us today is Craig Ryder, a Customer Experience Director at KPMG Nunwood. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of practicalities for everyone joining us today before we go into the webinar itself. Firstly, on your screen you should see a red technical support button, which is at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any problems in terms of technical issues throughout the webinar, then please just click that and you will be able to get that resolved quite quickly. And also on your screen you should see an Ask a Question button. So please feel free to pose questions throughout the webinar. Please don't wait till the end. We'd love to see them as we go through. And we will look through those and do our best to answer them at the end of the webinar. So we'd appreciate any questions you might have. That's all from me, and I shall now hand over to Craig, who is going to take us through the webinar.
Thank you, Tamsin. So you can see on screen our first slide, which is titled Harnessing the Power of the Many. And the reason for the title is simple. What we've found over the last few years, and especially in this last American study, which was published a couple of weeks ago, is that successful companies need to get many things right in order to lead our customer experience rankings. When they do get those things right, we find they benefit from a compound effect from all of those individual actions. So just before we get into today's presentation, I wonder if everyone listening could just participate in a vote. We're asking the question: how capable is your organization at managing the different dimensions of customer experience? So you should see a little voting button on your screen now. If during the course of the next moment or two you could give us a view as to whether your organization is very capable, is quite capable, not very capable, or not at all capable, then we will publish that information during the course of the presentation today. Okay, so just before we get into the detail of the American survey and the lessons that we've learned, we'll just give a short introduction to where this data came from. So over the last 7 years, KPMG Nunwood have been researching customer experience across the US, across the UK and Australia. Each year in those territories, we've asked thousands of consumers questions about many organizations across 10 different industries. Over the course of that time, we've now received over 1.25 million customer evaluations, and we now have some pretty detailed information about how 1,000 brands across those multiple sectors deliver customer experience. So specifically on to today's presentation, this is information out of the 2016 US Analysis. This was research we conducted in March of this year. We spoke to 7,500 consumers and we asked them about 243 different brands. And as we said, those brands spanned 10 sectors, and in fact those sectors are listed there on the right hand side of the screen. What the 7 years worth of research has shown us is that invariably there are 6 pillars that underpin a great customer experience. The pillars are as follows: personalisation, expectations, how you manage and meet and exceed customer expectations, time and effort, how you minimise customer effort and create frictionless processes where appropriate. Our 4th pillar is integrity, and that's around being trustworthy and engendering trust in everything you do. Our 5th pillar is resolution. How do you turn a poor experience into a great one when things go wrong? And finally, empathy. How do you achieve an understanding of the customer's circumstances in order to drive a deeper rapport with the customer? Now that framework helps any business anywhere understand how to identify how they stack up against their competitors, how they stack up against leaders in their industry, and actually how they stack up against different organizations in different industries who are most likely influencing how your customer thinks about customer experience. On the back of all this work, we've run a lot of analysis as to the importance of each of these pillars in delivering great customer experience. And obviously, all consumer-facing organisations want customers to be advocates, i.e. they want customers to shout loud about the organisations they're spending money with. And they also want those customers to keep coming back. So they want those customers to be increasingly loyal. And what this chart shows is actually each of those 6 pillars is an important element of driving those desirable customer behaviours. We can see that personalisation, whether you're looking at advocacy or loyalty, is the most important pillar, so 25% and 21% respectively. However, each of the pillars, as we can see there, is an important element in driving those important customer behaviours. When we then look at the benefits of becoming a customer experience leader, we can see there are a range of benefits. We've split into first order benefits and second order benefits. Without going through these in great detail, the first order benefits of becoming customer experience leader are listed on the left hand side. We can see that consumers will repurchase. They will buy more products more readily from your organisation. They are less sensitive on price, and they will start to drive positive word of mouth. All of that then leads to a second order set of results where we have a lower cost to acquire. We have a lower cost to serve those customers because the experience is relatively frictionless. We have a far more stable customer base. We can potentially charge a higher price for the premium our customer experience allows us to levy. That will lead in itself to higher sales, and beyond positive word of mouth, we get a generally positive reputation, which ensures more customers will come to our business, I guess, without questioning us in the first instance. All of that then flows through into enhanced shareholder value. Okay, so comparing the UK's customer experience to the US's customer experience, what do we find? Well, we find that the US still leads the UK. We think the US is around 3 years ahead of the UK in terms of delivering customer experience. What that means is an American customer is 6 times more likely to have a great experience in their day-to-day life than that of a UK customer. So Americans are far more likely to experience great customer service, and of course that has the impact of hiring the bar for anybody operating in that marketplace. On balance then, what we see is that the top 5 US brands in our survey we think are the best customer experience brands in the Western world. These are the 5 brands that we believe delivers at the absolute pinnacle of customer experience, and many UK and in fact global brands can learn from them. So who is the US top 10? Okay, so in at number 1, and a brand we admire hugely and have consistently been a number 1 brand for us, is USAA. This is an American financial service organisation initially set up and in fact still focused on serving the needs of military and ex-military personnel. USAA do an amazing job across all of the 6 pillars, but in particular empathy is something that really stands out for the brand. Our second brand is Disney Parks. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. Our third brand is Publix. That is a southeastern US food retailer. Similar in many ways to Waitrose, it's a employee-owned organisation. Been around since 1930. And compared to many grocers, they enjoy, for example, an enormous amount of long service amongst their colleague base. It's a great place to work. And over 25,000 of their employees, in fact, have been with the business 10 or more years. That is a very, very impressive statistic, especially in the grocery marketplace. Brand number 4 is Amazon, who I'm sure I didn't introduce. Brand 5 is Chick-fil-A, which is a US fast food brand. And clearly that is an extremely crowded marketplace. And Chick-fil-A have a very, very good reputation for customer service. They talk about second mile service, which we'll come on to talk about. Our 6th brand is Costco Wholesale, which is a a membership retailer. You pay up front a membership fee, and then that gives you access to the store. And they have a very, very happy customer base who absolutely see the benefits of membership. Brand number 7 is another US retailer. This time it's a Southwestern-based retailer, HEB. They have 370 stores. They are particularly impressive in serving the Hispanic community in the States, and in fact they have many branches in Mexico now as well. Again, there's a big element here of colleague equity ownership. So around 15% of the organisation is in employee hands. Number 8, again, is another very impressive US food retailer. Wegmans is a Connecticut-based retailer, so active in the northeastern states. Again, we'll come on to talk about them later, but again, it's a relatively upscale organisation with the power to pull customers in from a huge drive time. UK food retail tends to look at a 10-minute drive time as to its customer base. Wegmans talks about people willing to drive an hour or more to get to their supermarkets. Brand number 9 is Southwest Airlines, an American low-cost carrier who have a very positive view on what their employees can contribute to the customer experience. So established in the early 70s by Herb Kelleher, Southwest from day one hired for attitude rather than skills, and recognized that in low-cost aviation, your value is generally added by the human interaction that you can achieve via the flight attendant, pilot, ground crew, etc. And then our 10th brand is Zappos, which is an online shoe retailer with a very, very positive customer base, and the internet is awash with positive Zappos customer experience stories. Having looked at the performance of the 10 industries we talked about earlier then, we can see that in the US there is in general a lead for the US industry over their UK counterpart. So we've got the 10 industries on this slide. You can see that logistics and utilities perform at 6 percentage points ahead of their UK counterparts. We can see grocery, retail and entertainment not very far behind at 5%. And in fact, in only 2 industries does the US lag behind the UK. That is just marginally in telecoms at 1% and a little more in the public sector at 7%. If we look at the 6 pillars and how the US compares to the UK, we can see, again, across each pillar, the US outperforms the UK, but it's resolution, what you do to put things right when they go wrong, where the US has a particular strength, followed by expectations, so how you manage and deliver against the expectations you set for your customers. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to David Conway, who's going to take us through the key themes from the US 2016 analysis.
That's great. Thanks very much, Craig. So 5 themes really that emerge from the work. So the first of those is the sum of small things, many small things. So Jim Senegal, who's the founder of Costco, talks extensively about retailing being the science of getting 1 million small things right every time across the business. And organisations are finding they're having to rethink how they structure themselves if they're going to ensure that they deliver what's needed consistently through the customer journeys. Not only are they having to think about their organisation design, but they're also beginning to think about how they deal with culture, how they deal with the employee experience, and how that links through to the customer experience and then customer behaviour. Now, in the last US research, we identified the fact that the US were well down the path in terms of omnichannel, much further ahead than the UK. They sort of skipped seeing digital as being separate from the mainstream of their business, but actually seeing digital as just an extension of their business model, just another mode of engagement. And what we're seeing there is not just increasing capability across multiple channels, but also some really interesting and exciting innovations taking place that are designed to sort of capture the imagination of the customer, but actually also make life easier for them. And then finally, how do these organisations manage to keep everything on track? How do they ensure that when they are dealing with these million small things, that the business is able to ensure that they all align and that the business achieves what it wants to achieve? So let's take a look at a little bit more detail of these. So in terms of the sum of many small things, here we've listed some of the sort of small things, but signature actions really, which organisations across the US are beginning to focus on. So one of the things that's interesting about these is that they're not necessarily big or expensive or things that are designed primarily to wow the customer. They're small things, often symbols or tokens of what the organisation is seeking to achieve for their individual customers. Let's have a look at one or two of those. So Disney, well known obviously for the Disney parks, but it's interesting that over time Disney have learned to turn queue management into an absolute science. So seeing the queue as being part of the overall experience, something that prepares you, creates a sense of anticipation and a sense of excitement before you go into the main ride itself. Now increasingly using technology, of course, to ensure that people don't spend a lot of time waiting around, but are able to go around the park and then get summons when it's their turn to go and join on the ride. So the end-to-end view of the customer experience is what sets Disney apart. And they start from booking and the whole concept of the sense of anticipation about going on the vacation right the way through the holiday and then coming back home at the end of it. But some of the signature actions around the way in which they manage queues. So the second is DoubleTree by Hilton. So for those who've stayed at a DoubleTree, you'll know that when you walk into the lobby, the first thing that assails you is the smell of cookies, fresh cooked cookies. Now, I suppose many people think this is just a nice to have, something that, a little bit of sweetness when you check in to the hotel. But actually the thinking behind it is quite interesting. So DoubleTree wanted to find something that was symbolic, something that showed that they really cared for their customers and recognised, that customers will be, making long trips to get to their hotels. A quick sugar pick-me-up in reception is a way to show that they genuinely care about the small things. And it's actually interesting that these organisations generally seem to sweat the small stuff. It's the little things that set them apart. Now, Trunk Club is launched, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, Craig, by Nordstrom.
Yes, so Nordstrom acquired a business actually called Trunk Club, and it is an excellent way of driving the Nordstrom difference into the online marketplace. So it's built off a sort of universal customer truth, and that customer truth is men tend not to like shopping for clothes. What Nordstrom do is replicate their personal shopper skill set on an online in an online scenario. So effectively, you set yourself up as a Trunk Club customer, and you talk to a personal shopper about your preferences, your favorite brands, your style, your work, your leisure time, and you then have an online personal shopper who comes to know you, and they send a trunk, a cardboard box, as shown on screen, with 2 or 3 items every month from which you can choose 1, 2, 3, or in fact send them all back at no cost. And the benefit there is that this isn't algorithm driven, but this is personal shopper driven, albeit the personal shopper has never met you in person. They operate from a central point. So it was an excellent way by Nordstrom to extend their core strength, which is the whole personal shopper proposition, move it into online in a very innovative manner.
Great stuff. That's a very well-dressed Craig Ryder there. Okay, moving on to the next one on our list. Well, this is USAA. So as Craig says, they came top of our league table this year in the US. We've highlighted them before for their innovation, but increasingly their signature actions are around solving problems for customers. They have what they call customer surround sounds. They're constantly listening to what it is that gets in the way and causes problems in their customers' lives, and then finding very creative ways to fix those. Now, servicing mainly members of the US military who received lots of checks at Christmas and Thanksgiving. They found that their customers were unable to deposit those checks easily. So they were the bank that pioneered photographing a check to make a deposit. And now many of the other banks have followed. But what's interesting about USAA is this has become their signature. It's become one of those things that customers talk about as being, emblematic, really, of USAA's focus on their customer. Zappos, the online shoe retailer, famed for many different aspects of their customer service. But one of the small things they do, which is actually often sort of, creates a sense of anticipation amongst their customers as much as getting the product, is getting a thank you note. Just a simple thank you that says, we're really pleased that you chose to do business with us. And the individual agents have the ability to, pen, draw, write their own thank you notes and send those to the customer. So just a small thing, but like many of these small things, it adds up to have a big impact overall on how customers feel about the experience that they have with Zappos. So these are the sorts of signature actions that we see, and I pose a couple of sort of final comments on that theme. So the first is that actually you can deliver a flawless experience, but is it memorable? So a flawless experience doesn't necessarily drive the right sort of customer behaviours in the future, so retention and advocacy. What's really important is that you do something to create a memory, something that encourages the customer to revisit and rethink about the experience that they've had with the organisation, and that then influences what they do in the future. Now, organisations are beginning to focus on both creating a flawless experience, but also how do they organise themselves around customer journeys. Now, I think at the outset we asked a question, didn't we, Tamsin, about the ability of organisations to manage multiple things. So, interestingly, the poll shows that 40% of our listeners feel that their business is not very capable at managing the different dimensions of customer experience. 30% quite capable, and then 30% very capable. So that's interesting. I would expect to see the not very capable match being a slightly bigger number, but there we go. So let's look at what organisations increasingly are doing in the US around how they manage and think about customer journeys. And I guess it's probably true for us in the UK as well, that in the traditional organisational structure, which is functional, a customer journey will meander its way through the organisation through a number of different functions. And often what we find is that customer journey is a default outcome of multiple individual decisions being taken by each function in its own right. So one of our clients recently talked about, as a major bank, talked about the fact that their post room decided to move the debit card postage from mail sort 1 to mail sort 2, which meant it moved from 2 days to 10 days. And it saved that department well over £250,000. What they didn't think about, of course, was that a number of people would start to ring the contact centre to find out where their debit card had gone. And so the failure demand that it created on the contact centre was way more than the amount that they had saved. So this ability of the organisation to see end-to-end and to develop an intentional journey is driving probably what we would call a matrix structure. So increasingly we're seeing either forums, so an individual forum for a particular customer journey, or an individual being allocated responsibility for managing the end-to-end, or being responsible for the end-to-end, and for brokering across different departments what the ultimate experience is going to look like. Now, in the US, we're seeing some really interesting and some quite unusual models emerging. So, USAA have what we would describe as a radial organisation. So they are organised around the customer. They've separated product out. Product is managed separately. They're almost product factories. And their marketing and sales and operational areas then determine which products and how those products will be put together before they're delivered to the customer. And they're organised in needs groups, so different combinations of needs. So You might think about something like day-to-day money management rather than a current account or a debit card or a credit card or a personal loan. And they're much more looking to develop solutions which may have multiple product aspects to deliver to the customer as a single entity. Now, they've also gone on and organised their contact centre into life events because they know that actually if their agents are able to speak in detail with the customer through a position of knowledge, they will build a stronger emotional relationship with that customer. So being mobilised or on military activity or buying a car or a home or a first job, their contact centre is set up to be able to advise you in the best way possible. So really organising themselves around the customer and being able to manage the customer journeys in a really cohesive and integrated way. So very grandly titled the Human Equity Continuum. So what do we mean by that rather torturous phrase? Well, what we mean by that is that increasingly we're seeing organisations paying attention to each dimension of the employee journey alongside the customer journey. So each of these areas, company culture, for example, is driven by potentially a customer team or a transformation team looking at changing the culture of the organisation. And colleague experience is driven by the HR team. Colleague behaviour by the operational team, customer experience by the customer experience team, and customer behaviour itself being looked at by the analytics team, and then finally we get a business outcome. So what we have is the major parts of the experience, each of the components that drives an experience, and we describe it as having a different engine. Now the question is whether those engines are pulling in the same direction. Are they all moving the organisation in a common way, or are they actually doing something separate, which is more akin to the agenda that the individual department itself has? And so this focus, I suppose, on linking the customer experience to the employee experience is not new. We saw it in the 1980s and 1990s with the service profit chain analysis that appeared at that time. But linking them together in a cohesive way is new, and we're seeing more and more organisations, particularly those in the top 10 in the US, focusing on managing the integrated approach to each of these areas. So the next one is omnichannel and innovation, and here is the chart really that shows the omnichannel league table. So we ask customers about their omnichannel experience. How easy is it to move across channels? Whether they got a consistent experience or not as they moved through channels. And unsurprisingly, what we see is that the top 10 brands not only deliver great experiences, but they are also the leaders in terms of the omnichannel delivery. And so in the US, unlike the UK, as we said in the introduction, digital has always been part of the overall business model. So in the UK, we tend to see digital as being something entirely separate, a sort of digital island, really, that is all about driving lower cost to serve, rather than seeing it as being one of the modes of engagement that a customer might want to use as part of a customer journey. And these organisations lead the world really now in terms of making that seamless transition between the different channels easy for their customer base. So innovation, well, we're seeing enormous amounts of innovation, and much of it being, in the digital area as new technologies, become available and organisations begin to think about the different problems they might serve. So I guess we've seen sort of a maturity change in digital. So in the early days, it was very much about automating existing processes and putting them into the digital environment. And then we saw organisations seeking to find sort of new and creative ways really to deploy digital. But more recently, what we're seeing is organisations looking at how do they solve issues, how do they solve problems for their customers, and make a more positive contribution to the customer's life. And Zappos, great example of an organisation that does that really, really easily. So ask Zappos, you see something that you particularly like, not sure where it's sold or what else might go with it. Take a photograph and email it through whatever channel is appropriate, and they will then identify what it is, where it is, and what sort of things potentially would match that particular area. So Zappos doing a lot really in this whole area of curated collections and accessorizing and making life really easy for people to make some very simple fashion decisions. Now this is my personal favourite really from USAA, and what we see with the UK banks and indeed other banks around the world is that they assemble massive amounts of data, and actually what they try and do is use that data to sell more to customers, so to improve the targeting of their direct marketing and their messaging and things like next best action. But what USAA have started to do is, how do we use that data to make lives easier for our customer? How do we equip our customer to make a better decision? And in this particular case, it's all about using that data to buy a car. So they know, of course, through their banking transaction systems, how much people are paying for particular cars from particular dealerships. And so they're able to equip their customer with the knowledge of what sort of discounts they might be able to negotiate when they talk to the dealer. But not only is it about equipping the customer, but also making life easier with sort of HPI checks and insurances and loans. Being very easy to assemble a package online really quickly, so that when you go and talk to the car salesman, you are literally in the driving seat when it comes to getting a really good deal. We're also seeing the use of robots more and more in the US, at the Customer Experience Engage conference this year, we saw Pepper, the robot, being used in a sort of customer service environment. And there's a lot of development in artificial intelligence going on to try and take robotic technologies and make them, useful and approachable and beneficial to people in their lives. Companion robots in Japan being a really good example of that, which Pepper is one. This is Oshbot, which I think is something that Lowe's use in their hardware stores. Helps with inventory control, taking customers to find particular products or things that they're looking for, and I'm not totally certain we'll see human beings being replaced by these in the very near term, but nonetheless it's interesting that organisations are beginning to experiment with these types of robotic technologies to see how customers react to them. So as much a learning exercise as it is improving customer service and customer experience. So the final theme is, how do we connect all of these things together as a business? So most organisations are thinking about transformation or enacting transformation. They have multiple different teams all seeking to move the organisation forward. And how do you ensure that what those teams do is cohesive and integrated and takes you to where you want to be as a business? And what we see across the top 10 in the US, and I'm sure it extends beyond that, is real clarity on the customer purpose, and using the definition of customer purpose as the mechanism by which you align the organisation behind a consistent direction. Now, alongside that, these organisations tend to have a set of rules, and those rules are relatively simple and straightforward. But what they do is they ensure that they act as criteria and guidelines really to ensure that things move in the right direction. So some organisations call them design criteria or design principles, but fundamentally they're about ensuring that people stay on the right page. And one of the things that is interesting in this context is if you look at birds flocking, then what you see is they conform to some simple rules, and those rules are follow the direction of the other birds, maintain a safe distance, match velocity and height, and ensure that you don't collide with anything in the process. And those simple rules mean that a very complex pattern can emerge that will move in a consistent direction. And this concept of a really well-articulated customer purpose and then a set of simple rules to ensure that it's implemented effectively is the model that we see being most effectively used in the US. In this particular case, this is about Disney and how they go about developing a wow experience consistently. Chick-fil-A, Craig talked about those a little bit earlier, and their simple rule is about focusing on what they call second mile service. So first mile is creating the product and delivering the product, but the second mile is what you do when the customer's got the product and is on your premises. How do you treat them? So either going out to welcome in the car park with an umbrella if it's raining, moving a chair for people, offering free top-ups and drinks. There's a whole set of things that they do to enhance the quality of the experience, and so second mile service being something that they're genuinely very focused on. Southwest Airlines, again, it's all about the people at Southwest Airlines, and the simple rule is very simply bring your personality to work and express it. So they are very sophisticated in how they recruit people to join their organisation, and also very clever about how they allow people to use their personality to engage and enthrall passengers on their airplanes. So finally, moving on to some of the the key learnings and alignment. And Craig, I know this is something that you've been looking at.
Okay. Yes, thanks, David. So David's taken us through the 5 key trends that we're seeing emerging from American customer experience leaders. And a key element in a lot of those trends is actually that of alignment. So it's at the heart of much of what's been said today. Where a business achieves true alignment, that's to say where strategy, employees and processes work in concert to give a truly great customer experience, that then growth and profitability are far more likely to follow. So we have an alignment checklist which are 15 questions that we'd suggest you ask your organisations to really help establish the extent to which you are truly aligned and therefore truly in a place to deliver customer experience excellence. So answer yes to those 15 questions, and then you are in a business that has that perfect alignment. So questions are as follows. Do you have a clear sense of customer purpose? Can your people understand that customer purpose and their role in delivering it? We've seen some examples today of some pretty simple customer purposes backed up by a simple set of rules that the front line, the exco, the middle management and customers to an extent can all understand about the organisation in question. Our third question is, are we clear on the few simple rules that guide that experience that you're trying to deliver and in fact designing future customer experiences? Is your organisation able to align the employee experience with the customer experience? Are we organised in a way that allows us to optimise the delivery of customer journeys? Potentially there are things in how we structure our business that stop us delivering customer journeys to their highest level. Do we have a business model that links experience design to commercial outcomes? In the US report that was published 2 weeks ago, we have the full set of alignment questions, which by all means download and take them back to your workplace. On the KPMG Nunwood website, there is that full report, plus a whole series of podcasts, white papers and previous reports, which will give you a very, very strong view of where customer experience is going, who's out there doing a great job, and tips, hints and best practice to help you do a better job for your organisations. Okay, so we've got some time left for questions, I think, Tamsin. Do we have any questions that have come in as of yet?
We do have a few through, yes, Craig. So thank you both very much for that great insight into the best practices of the USA's leading brands. A couple of the questions through specifically reference the leader for this year and previous years. So we've seen USAA continuing to perform well. Does their specific target customer base make it easier for them to do so well, do you think?
So knowing a lot about your customers helps you deliver a great customer experience. And I think what we've seen, and what we continue to see in the UK and the US, is that brands that have tried to be all things to all people in the past are starting to come unstuck. So think of some of our big supermarket chains here in the UK. We're seeing winners in the US doing a great job of targeting specific customers, using all the customer data that is now available to really get a feel for what that customer wants. So yeah, USAA have a clear customer target, but in the age of data, increasingly we'll find businesses leveraging that knowledge to create specific experiences.
Yeah, okay. And another of the questions that's come through particularly looks at the top 10 again, the leaders there, particularly highlights the food retailers doing so well in the US. So the question was, why do we think American food retail is just so far ahead of the UK?
So I think the same answer really applies. So again, in the UK, our traditional big four have all tended to be all things to all people. So very little to differentiate one from the other. And all of those brands have, over the past 20 years, done a pretty good job of trying to operate value products, mid-tier products, and premium products. We're now seeing a polarization in the marketplace, and in fact, in the US, that polarization was always there. So Publix, H-E-B, Wegmans, amongst others, all have a very clear view of their target customer and are creating unique experiences that it's very, very difficult for other brands, particularly those who try to be all things to all people, to replicate.
Well, I'd just add to that, if I might, Tamsin. One of the things I think that also puts these organisations, grocery organisations, apart from the UK is their focus on recruiting people that have a real passion for the category and a real passion for customer service. So they pay more than traditional retailers. They train them much more intensely than other retailers do. So, if you work for Wegmans and the cheese counter, it's not just about putting cheese out. It's also about, being able to go to Italy or France and see how the cheese is made, so that you're able to talk to customers in a really knowledgeable way, and in a way which, equips the customer with information when they need it. We're seeing these retailers, Trader Joe's, Wegmans, Publix, H-E-B, all of them, focus on the role of their staff in exciting and engaging their customers. And also alongside that, their stores have a sense of theatre. They're interesting places to go as destinations. As Craig said earlier, people will make an hour's drive to Wegmans because it's a fantastic place to go. It's got twice the number of stock units of a UK supermarket. It has trains running around the inside to keep your children happy. It's got sports bars to keep your husband happy. And it's got a Michelin-starred restaurant if you want to use one of those as well. So, this is reconceiving the whole concept of retailing to make it, far more engaging and enthralling than, traditional supermarkets, which is where you just go and buy food.
So much more of a sense of theatre and entertainment in that experience.
Exactly right, yeah.
Okay.
So another question here. One of our listeners is suggesting that they love the idea of bringing personality to work. Do we think this is possible when working in a regulated environment where you have to give consistent information to every customer? So actually, Southwest Airlines is a great example of this. So clearly in the airline world, imparting safety information to passengers, making sure passengers are doing what they need to do is at the heart of the role of the cabin crew. But they find fantastic ways of using their personalities to make the whole experience of low-cost travel a little bit more fun. So the internet is awash with examples of how this is delivered. I saw one yesterday. It was a flight attendant announcement saying, just before takeoff, ladies and gentlemen, we have a passenger today. It's their 80th birthday, and they're making their first flight. In fact, it's the pilot. So, of course, the whole set of passengers love that sort of banter, that interaction with the crew, and you won't find any of the American legacy airlines delivering that kind of fun, that kind of warmth and personality in and amongst the safety procedures and demonstrations that have to be delivered.
Okay, great, thank you, Craig. A couple of questions just coming through that particularly focus on the theme of organisational structure that we've talked through in today's session. Particularly questioning around, are we seeing these new organisational designs coming through in the same way in the UK as we're seeing for the US?
Good question. We're beginning to, I think, is the answer. We're seeing some more extreme structures in the US. So we talked about USAA, but also, Zappos has, embodied a science called holacracy, which is all about, moving decision-making to the point of contact with the customer by removing your entire middle management structure. So, it's a very different approach to ensuring that employees are empowered and, given decision-making authority. But in the UK, we're seeing organisations as they, do more and more work on customer journey design and customer journey definition, beginning to struggle with how you manage a customer journey in a very functional organisation. So we're seeing, increasingly amongst some of the bigger banks and financial services organisations who are probably a little more advanced on, customer journey design, that they're now beginning to think about organisation design. So how do we structure ourselves in a way which delivers a consistent experience through the customer journey, and beginning to see the customer journey itself, as part of the proposition. So, one bank that, we know very well has started to add the customer journey as part of the sort of the P&L responsibilities of individual product managers, and starting to redefine the product manager's role as being responsible for the end-to-end journey as well as the product. So that's a kind of interim step that's moving organisations along that journey. But we're also seeing the sort of the emergence of the matrix organisation too. So again, some banks and some airlines beginning to look at how do they create customer committees or customer journey committees that have representatives of each of the functions on them, and collectively get the functions to determine what that customer journey needs to look like and be like, and then constantly improve it and develop that journey so it doesn't stay static once it's been redesigned. So yes, we are beginning to see some new organisation models emerging. Nothing quite as far-reaching as the work done by Zappos and USAA, but certainly organisations are now beginning to have to grapple with this particular problem.
Mm-hmm. And organising around customer journeys much more. Okay.
That's exactly right.
One more question that's come through, which perhaps might be our last for the day, but one that has been asked: if we were ranking the top 10 on their ability to recover customers alone, who would be performing well? Who would be in the top? I don't have the data to hand on that, but I guess it's who's particularly strong in terms of their resolution in that sense.
Well, I guess you could look at any of the top 10 and you'd see that, resolution, customer recovery is a really key part of the experience that, they design and put together for their customers. And again, one of the things we see more in the US than we do in the UK is when organisations look at these customer journeys and define these customer journeys, they look at the points in that journey where things may go wrong, and they identify what their plan B is. What is the contingency plan? If something goes wrong at this stage for the customer, what do we have to do as a business to put it right? And I recognise that no matter how well designed the customer journeys are, or how effective their systems and processes and procedures, that things will go wrong. There are things that you can't possibly foresee, unintended consequences of things that happen sort of further upstream in the journey. And where that leaves these organisations is that they know what they need to do to very quickly put the customer back to where they need to be. Amazon's a really good example of an organisation that does that brilliantly. And internally, they call it inverting the turtle, because if a turtle ends up on its back, it can't get back on its legs again. And so it's all about being able to put the turtle back on its legs, or the customer back in the position they would have been in had it not gone wrong in the first place. Public's another organisation that is fantastic at customer recovery, and the individual people that work for Public, as Craig said, very much like Waitrose, they are partners in the business. It's in their interest to make sure the customer leaves happy, and they have a rule that no customer should leave the store unhappy, and they make that work.
Fantastic position to be in. I think that's all our questions through for today, so thank you very much everyone for joining us. With some further resources available on the Excellence Centre on nunwood.com if you would like to read more. So there is the full US CEE 2016 analysis available, a full report, which is available to download. And also following this webinar, a recording will be available over the next few days, which you can download and share as well if you'd like to. But all that remains for me to say is thank you very much, David and Craig, and thank you all for joining us today.